Well, hey everyone, it is Katy Ursta of the Make Chic Happen podcast. I'm actually here today doing a solo episode. My partner in crime is on vacation. She's actually in the air right now on her way to Mexico, a very, very well earned, much needed vacation for her and her husband. So I decided to fly solo on this episode with one that I think is going to be impactful for a lot of listeners here. And I know for me, this episode would have been so helpful in the early stages of building my business. So, this may not be an episode for you, but if it is for somebody in your community, in your team, I would love for you to share it. And all we're going to be talking about is really how to work a side gig, a side business, while you also have a full time job, because that is what I feel a lot of business owners, when they're starting, when they're building the foundation of their business, a lot of us start there. We kind of have a side gig, or we have this big dream, or we have a vision of where we want to go, but we also have the responsibility and the duty of earning income outside of what we're doing as a side job. And I thought what I would do is really break down three things that help me grow my income to that six-figure mark while I was still a full-time teacher teaching middle school, also having a son. And then later, even while I was teaching, I had been diagnosed with cancer. So for me to share this, I feel like it's really easy for us to fast forward and look at the 10-year gap between where I started and where I am now, and to forget that the process of getting there was pretty intense. And there was a lot of work and grit and grind that went into it. And through the experience and the things that I've learned, it probably would have been a lot easier if I had actually known these things and applied these things pretty early on. And even some of the tools that I'm going to mention today, I think will be helpful for those who are working a full-time job and building a side hustle or a side job as well. So my hope is through this podcast episode, that as you're listening, if you know someone who would benefit from some of these tips, I'd love for you to share it with them. So let's kind of dive in. First, when I get started, I want to share that my husband and I, when I started my job, I was in network marketing. My first position outside of what I did through income through the education field was through the direct sales space in the health and wellness industry. And before I even started my business, I didn't know what direct sales was, didn't know what network marketing was, had never heard any negative or positive connotation that had really been aligned with that. And so for me, when I went into it, I literally was so excited and thrilled with this idea of just getting the groceries paid for. So when I think back to that time in my life, I realized that there were really three things that were helping me build this business from the ground up that I was doing, that I don't even know that I would have been able to at that time identify that I was doing, but it did help me get to the five and then the six-figure mark, and then ultimately build my first seven figures through the direct sales space. So I guess I should give you a little bit of background and tell you that we were strapped for cash when I started. I went into the direct sales space because we had just taken on a pretty big mortgage. We were playing keep up with the Joneses, and my husband had this ridiculous budget Excel sheet. I still cringe when I think of that. That we would sit down at the kitchen table, and every single month we would look at our spending, and we were never spending crazy. We were spending on necessities. We were spending on an occasional date night. We were spending on things that really, to me, weren't even this idea of creating a good life. We weren't going on vacations. We weren't doing anything extravagant. It really was the bare bones. And I thought at that time that this is just what people do. They get really stressed out about finances, and they don't really do much more than get by. And then when I started in direct sales, it really was just a way for me to alleviate some of that stress that Mike and I had and get the groceries paid for. That was the big goal at the time. And in order to get the groceries paid for, when I signed up for the direct sales space, I remember thinking, what do I legit have to do? Like, I get what you're saying about like all of these bells and whistles with direct sales, but I want to know what I need to do to get the groceries paid for. So, the first tip I have for you is clarifying what the actual work is, not just the benchmarks. Here's the thing about the direct sales space: there are so many bells and whistles. There are so many shiny objects. There are so many great incentives to push towards. But at the end of the day, it isn't the benchmarks that are going to pay the bills. It really is the actual work and making sure that work is aligned to finances. It's aligned to what you want to be able to achieve in terms of financial goals. So, for example, when I first started, there was always this great benchmark of hitting what they called Success Club. And Success Club, in a nutshell, was really at that time, it was selling what they called 3 challenge packs, which included a product for your client, which was on home direct. And then at that time, too, it was also bringing someone in to join your organization too. So every single month, I was told just to hit this goal month after month after month. And I got that. So it was like bringing in 3 customers, and then it was bringing in a new team member, and you do that month after month. But at the end of the day, I started to ask myself, okay, how does this actually equate to money? So every time I sell that, am I aware of how much income I am actually bringing in? And then on top of that, if I have to sell 3 of these, if that's my benchmark that I'm working towards, how many people am I going to actually have to talk to? And then I started to say, okay, well, I have no background in sales. I don't really know exactly what I'm doing. So if I actually have to talk to people, what do I actually have to say? Like, what does that conversation look like? How do I invite people to learn more about the product that I'm selling and the product that I'm using? How do I actually make it look interesting to that person as well? And then if I'm having a conversation with them and they ghost me, what does a follow up actually look like? So I started to look at it as though it wasn't the actual work when people were saying, you just hit SC, what they called SC5, you just hit SC5. I had to say to myself, well, what does that entail? What is the actual work beyond just the benchmark? What does it mean to do those things? And then once I did that, I was then able to create a checklist. And it's pretty cool because this is aligned right to that proven 2-hour workday challenge that we're doing. It's all in the show notes for you too. All of this information is in there for you. But what I found was if I worked from a checklist, I was getting to that goal easier because I was so focused on what I was actually doing. I was so focused on the actual work it was taking to achieve it. Now, with that being said, these things like volume or success club or whatever it is that the company is putting out for you to work towards, you just need to make sure that it's aligned to why you signed up, what it is that you're working towards, what it is that matters to you, which really brings me to point 2. And that is to set appropriate goals for the actual time you have to put into your business while considering your other priorities. One time when I first started, I was on this call, and I have to add too, it's really funny for me to look back because I had joined an organization, and from an outside perspective, everybody in this organization was mind-blowingly beautiful. I mean, like flawless, and they all looked like they had literally stepped out of a magazine. And I was on this call, and one of the women who was an upline of an upline of an upline was talking about her big goal. And her big goal was this dream wedding. And her big goal was, flying her family out of the country to be a part of this wedding. And for me at that time, I was a teacher who was just getting the groceries paid for. That was my big goal, was to get the groceries paid for. And I remember seeing this and going, I cannot even fathom that lifestyle, nor do I even know if I want that type of lifestyle. But I do know that that goal is not going to be a one size fits all. I know that if I was trying that goal on for size, it really wouldn't work for me. The vision that she was casting and the things that she was doing, it wouldn't fit into my lifestyle because number one, I wasn't able to provide a full time commitment to my business. Not only was I working full time, I was grading papers. So a lot of evenings were spent with a red pen in my hand, grading research papers and homework and spelling and grammar and all of those fun things. And then on top of that, I also had a son, Nick. Oh my gosh, it's crazy to think back. He was 2 years old at the time, and I hadn't seen him all day because I was teaching. And when I got home, he was a priority. I wanted to be around my son and I wanted to hang out with my family and make dinner. And I didn't want to be distracted by the business that I was creating while I was taking that time for my family. And I'll be honest with you, it did get a little bit messy there. But I also found that when I was setting boundaries for myself, I was starting to really value the things, the action that I needed to take to be able to build my business. And so for me, when I think back at that time, I was very clear about the goals that were appropriate for me. I was really good about making sure that if I wanted to get the groceries paid for at the end of the month, I knew exactly what the action was that I needed to take throughout the month to get there. So there were a couple of tools that I can suggest now that I didn't have then that I would highly, highly recommend. And one of those tools is the Make Chic Happen time blocker. Look, if you are busy and you are working full time, you can create a side income. You can absolutely create a business where you can get the groceries paid for. But you have to be good about saying, what are my boundaries? What are the other priorities that I have in my life? What are the things that are like my untouchable time? And then where am I going to work my business? So, for example, when I did teach, I also was a cross country coach and I was also in charge of the student council. And there were certain days throughout that week that I knew they were untouchable. I was not able to go to work to work my side business during the school hours. And then on top of that, there were nights that I was at cross country practice or I was doing something with the student council. So that was untouchable. And then I also really did enjoy being with my husband. And it was very hard to explain that I was going to work 5 to 7 days a week nonstop and then kind of put our marriage by the wayside because I also knew that that wasn't healthy. I knew that from the very beginning of building my business that boundaries really, really mattered. So I would kind of block out every single week what it actually looked like to work my business. And for me, a lot of times that was first thing in the morning. I got into the habit very early on of waking up pretty early. And I also got in the habit of knowing if I only had an hour and a half, I knew exactly what it was that was going to build my business. I knew exactly what benchmarks I was working towards. But more importantly, I knew the specific action I needed to take to be able to build that business. And so that first goal I set for myself of getting the groceries paid for, I knew the action that I needed to take to be able to get there. And everything else was like a cherry on top. If I had time to get to it, I could. But if it wasn't something that I had time for, it just wouldn't be a priority for that. I also want to just add this little like side footnote when it comes to setting appropriate goals. When we when we aren't very clear about what we want the business to do for us, when we aren't very clear about the specific goals that we want to achieve, what I find is we can fall into this trap of I have to work, I have to do, I have to take action, I have to. And we start hanging on to what other people in the business are doing. And what happens is that starts to build this resentment because we aren't clear on what success looks like to us. And when we build resentment, it's not just necessarily towards the business, but we can start to see other people, especially those closest to us, start to build resentment towards us because we haven't identified those boundaries and we haven't respected them either. I also go back upon like this once upon a time, and I am very, very clear now that in setting healthy boundaries, I was teaching my downline that I was growing to do the same thing. And if I wasn't setting healthy boundaries, I was also putting up this sort of facade that I was working 24/7. And at full disclosure, that isn't healthy for anybody. And I never fall into that hustle culture, that 10x, that hustle harder, more, more, more sort of mentality. I look at it as like, be very clear, be specific about what success looks like to you, and then align it back to what is the specific action I need to take to get there. Let's talk about the third tip. And this is really just taking it one day at a time. I love this idea of casting a big vision and going back to that first call I was on with my upline in the organization, and seeing that beautiful vision she had cast for herself. I also kind of took a step back and went, well, that doesn't really feel right to me. So I think about at that time how wrong that felt, but I also think about where Katy is now, 10 years later, 10 years into the business. And it's very hard for me to believe that 10 years ago, that girl could be who I am today. It is the journey that I went on to build my business, to grow my income. There's no way that I look back and think, wow, that would even be possible for me too, because I hadn't yet become that type of person. So, although I can appreciate a big vision and I can say, I think it's important to kind of cast where you want to go, maybe 1 year, 2, 3, 4 years out. I also say to myself, you really have to get married to the small steps that you need to take in order to get there. And your eyes need to be focused on those small steps. It's called the mile marker mindset. And really, that's like if you're thinking about, driving down the road, right? And it's kind of late in the evening. So you're super, super focused on the mile markers that are right ahead of you. And so as you're driving, you aren't really thinking about how in the morning you'll be exactly where you want to be. You'll be maybe at the coast. You're driving towards the coast and you can't wait to see the great vision of, the sun on the water and just a perfect day for your family. Although that's sort of in the back of your mind, your focus needs to be on those small mile markers right in front of you without getting distracted by all of the other things that are happening around you. And in order to do that, it takes some courage and it takes celebrating of those small wins. It takes you going, yes, I signed my first distributor. Yes, I hit my first benchmark. Yes, I hit my first retention goal, whatever those things are. And it's also a willingness to learn from those setbacks that you've had. All those times you're driving down the road and you hit a pothole and you don't get the reaction that you want, or somebody that you sent a message to decides that they're going to sign up with somebody else, or the person that you're sending a follow-up to ghosts you, or somebody from your past makes a comment about the work that you're doing. All of those setbacks are really just set-ups for you to learn more about leaning into the business. And as I look back at what I've been able to achieve through the direct sales space, what started as a goal to get the groceries paid for, I began to cast bigger visions for myself based on the small wins I was accruing along the way. So the first small wins were those groceries they were able to get paid for. And then the second win was the car bill. I was able to actually get a better car, a better vehicle that I felt really safe in with my kiddos. Or at that time, it was just Nick, but I felt really safe in driving that car. And then it became wouldn't it be cool if I could get an extended maternity leave while I was pregnant with my son, Dom? And then it became, wouldn't it be crazy if this could actually pay for the medical bills while I was going through treatment? And then it became, wouldn't it be insane crazy if I could leave my full-time job and do this full-time? And I created that big vision one small step at a time, one mile marker at a time. So if you're finding that your vision is so big that it doesn't actually call you to take action, it's too big and we need to scale it back. We need to actually cast a smaller vision for ourselves that makes sense for right now. Katy then would never have believed that she would go on to build 3 7-figure, coming on 8-figure businesses. So when you think about that, I wouldn't have been able to fathom it. I couldn't have imagined it. However, in doing so, because I was able to do that, I can look back and I can say to myself, all right, I did this because I was able to break down the big vision and celebrate those small steps along the way. Today, though, I also want to give you a bonus tip. And I kind of should say this with caution because it might not be something that your upline is sharing with you, and maybe not intentionally. They might not necessarily be not telling you this, or maybe they themselves don't even realize it. But in looking back at the growth of my business, and in looking back at my own numbers, and in looking back at things that I did differently, especially as somebody who didn't have a lot of time to work her business, this is the one thing that I realize now, looking back, has made a significant difference in my business. And this is going to be like the tip that if you walk away with, okay, so Katy said, all right, 3 tips, right? Clarify what the actual work is, not the benchmarks. All right. Number 2 was set appropriate goals for the actual time you have to work the business while considering your other priorities. Sure. And of course, 3 was taking it one day at a time, really taking a big vision for yourself and scaling it down into your small attainable steps along the way. Those are all important. And you may have already heard those ones before. And even as you're listening to this, you might go, okay, I am going to understand that. I get that. I know I need to actually look at my time blocker and I need to block things out. But the tip I'm going to give you right now for anyone in direct sales, I feel like is the most underrated tip of all time. And it's not one that the sales team is likely talking about. Maybe they are. It's probably not one that's super highlighted in team calls by your upline. And the reason that it's not super fancy is because it's not actually the exciting part, and it's often not the one that goes most rewarded. But when it comes to your income and what you're walking away with, I find that it's probably the most important one. And it's this. Your bonus tip today is that residual income is the bread and butter of your business. And a lot of people don't know this, but this is key to your weekly paycheck, especially when it comes to your own personal commissions as well as team growth. Sure, as your team grows, residual is great because your team is duplicating the things that you are teaching in order to see that income grow, right? And we know that part of it. If we've been in direct sales for some time, we think of residual income in terms of team growth. But I actually think a huge part of my success came when residual income was through customer sales month after month after month. And I started to get very, very good about setting retention goals through customer satisfaction so that my customers came back every single month for the products that I had. Every time I launched a product, they were excited about it. And most importantly, they were the ones referring people to me. And I had a system for when I would actually ask them to join my organization as well. But keeping my clients happy, seeing results, and referring me as their go-to girl for all things health and wellness was a huge part of my strategy, and something that I teach now through what we call the healthy pipeline as well. So it's a whole training that I do with women I mentor in direct sales that is a key factor when it comes to building your business, but having a very limited amount of time. And I know that it's really fancy and exciting to talk about new sales, new customers, and hitting the benchmarks that a company can create for you. But you really want to find a way to ask yourself, am I also focusing on retention? Am I focusing on customer satisfaction? Do I have a referral program that is set up? Because I find that that is also a huge part of income growth as well. And no matter what, at the end of the day, when you really take these four things into consideration, when you really think about working a full-time job and then also having this hope and aspiration for allowing your side income to grow as well, I find it incredibly important to know exactly what you're working towards. And it doesn't have to be fancy. There was never this idea that I would leave my full time job. That was never the goal when I started. It truly was to get the groceries paid for. And that goal was just enough for me to say, I believe I can actually do it. If I know what the actual work is, I believe I can actually do it. And then I had to grow into this space of being confident enough to set bigger goals, and then another goal, and then another goal, so that I could begin to cast a bigger vision for my life and ultimately set success up for where I am today. So my bonus tip for you too, when you look at your business right now, I want you to actually analyze what the actual work is you need to do to achieve your goals. And then I want you to look at your time and ask yourself, audit it. Where are you spending your time? And if you don't have the Make Chic Happen time blocker, it's a super inexpensive product and it's one that is super, super helpful for your business. And then once you do that and you set those appropriate goals for yourself, you just go back and you say, all right, what's my big vision that is actually exciting me, that doesn't intimidate me, that gets me excited to work towards? And then lastly, ask yourself, do I have a customer satisfaction program? Do I really take customer retention month after month after month into consideration? Or am I slaying just by getting those first time sales and then kind of putting the customer by the wayside? There's so much opportunity for the people who have already made an investment in you to continually invest over and over and over again, whether as somebody who is just a client or somebody who becomes a member of your organization as well. All right, you guys, loads of advice for all of my friends who are working full time, and props to you, because it is so freaking hard to have a day job and believe in your vision to continue to work your side hustle. And I see you and I get it. And I want you to know you are not alone. We have an entire community right on Instagram of people who are just like you. I encourage you to go into @chicinfluencer on Instagram and find other business owners who are doing the dang thing, who are right beside you, who are working that job, and they are also working toward their dream too. So I really hope this episode helped. If it was helpful, do us a favor, leave a rating and review right here on Apple, right, for us to see, and also share this one, especially for your friends or your team members who are maybe frustrated because they are working so hard on their day job, but they also have a big dream and vision outside of what they do in their 9 to 5 or whatever they might work. Share this. It always helps to hear what your feedback is. And as always, let us know what you think about this episode. Tag us @chicinfluencer or @Make Chic Happen podcast. And we'll see you next time on the podcast.